I can't see why there needs to be a pope. Like, why? Let's say that God really did choose a main spokesperson. If this is true, we should at least consider how the concept of having a God spokesperson, how it has deviated from how the Bible portrays it. Because, as the Bible explains it, whenever there was someone who God chose as a main spokesperson, you didn't see them living lavishly. On the contrary, God gave them a life where they were not to depend on money at all. I'm guessing that was because prophets could hear the voice of God more clearly when money had zero influence on their life. Back then it was actually prophets, not profits. So money did not even factor into their lifestyle. And also, these prophets who spoke for God, they were known to be hated by the majority of believers for speaking against the mainstream of religious thought, against the common thought of most peoples back then. Nowadays, what do we see with the Pope? A Pope is largely beloved by the people of faith and by the people of the secular world, because when it comes to the Pope's advice for religious living, he's known to change what's religiously permissible in order to fit with the ever-progressive liberal ideas. The biblical men of God, however, they were unshakable because they feared God, not man. And this wasn't just with the prophets, but also when God himself visited the earth as one of us. God was known as Jesus the Christ, who was not a spokesperson of God, but rather Jesus was the literal person of God in the flesh, the actual voice. And guess what? Jesus, though he is the king of all creation, he chose to represent himself in a social class that you'd least expect, working at a type of job that you'd least expect that the king of the universe to work at, without even a regular place to go rest his head, homeless because he was always traveling in order to preach everywhere, and he was always hated everywhere. Who was he hated by? By the wealthy religious organizations. That's who hated Jesus, because unlike them, Jesus remained untouched by corruption. His existence alone condemned the hearts of the religious leaders who claimed to be God's spokespersons. They could feel it in their hearts when Jesus was around them, that there was corruption in their lives. So in Jerusalem, what happened? It actually ended up being the main high priest of the temple who suggested to have Jesus killed. How's that for someone who alleges himself ordained by God? Hey, I have an idea. What is it, high priest of God? Let's murder God. Good job, High Priest Caiaphas. A+ in your role as God's high priest. Little did Caiaphas know he was actually sacrificing the ultimate lamb for a universe-sized result. And we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. So sure, biblically, God is the one who instituted the temple. It was God's idea to have main spokespersons for him. But was God's presence found in the temple at the time of Jesus? I think that ship sailed a long time ago, because God's presence left when the hearts of the people and the temple priests went corrupt after money and after other vices, up to and including secret occult worship, as one prophet discovered. So this pattern was broken. The presence was no longer in temples created by men. In vain they believed that they were the voice of God, up to and including murdering the sent one of God. That's what happens when the actual Messiah Jesus clashes with these organizations who claim to be the spokespersons of God when really they're not. Now, what else can we notice about the biblical way that God selected a main spokesperson? Well, it was always the least expected person. Many times it was the one who was terrible at talking, and it was always from the poorest family and the least from within that family, and those with zero social significance, with zero social standing. So God has his way of doing this. It's obvious that God enjoys choosing those from whom the world considers foolish in order to shame the proud. That is the pattern that there is to it. A pattern that I can identify and say, God is at work there. So then, what happens when I notice the complete opposite in modern times? Well, when I see a pope sitting in this gigantic, luxurious palace, getting his annual salary of $300 million a year, and with $64 billion in assets, and then investments in many banks, including with the Rothschilds, and then the Vatican's own bank, not a bank account, mind you, I said his own bank, fully invested financially in things like steel, chemical, coal, and oil, etc., etc. And then the Pope turns over to us, the peasants, and admonishes mankind about climate change. It's like you're investing in freaking oil. So the papacy doesn't sound like a faith organization to me. It sounds like a business, a mega business where religion is merely a front for a money operation. It's hypocrisy, is it not? So could it be that to the Vatican, religion is merely just their excuse to receive large donations worldwide? Now, but do they give to charity? I know that they do, and I'm sure it's way more than I could ever give. Obviously. But however, I give my 10% regularly, but when the Vatican gives, it's an amount that's nothing to them. You see, because the Vatican is not going to give 10% of its entire wealth. Look, open your eyes. Proportion is what's relative here. They can give a lot, sure, but it's only what feels like pennies to them. We got to remember the parable that Jesus spoke about the impoverished lady who gave a little, but it was all she had left. Now, speaking about impoverished lady, mega organizations like the Vatican could end world hunger as we know it. Now, what does the Vatican need to do to accomplish this? Sell some of their assets, investments, some of their properties. Just sell most of what you have and give it to the poor. And then the Pope would still be incredibly well off afterward. Because see, they keep asking us, the peasants, to end world hunger, when the Vatican could actually do it.
Di persone che ancora oggi soffrono la fame. Non possiamo girarci dall'altra parte e far finta che questo non esista.
Look, I'm just saying, all this is not to say that the people of the Catholic faith can't be genuine and kind and faithful. I'm not talking about the people though, I'm talking about the Pope. About this idea that there is still a special spokesperson for God. The idea that mankind benefits at all from having a specific chosen main speaker for God on earth. Like, please. God already came and went. His name is Jesus, and he left us with his God Spirit to dwell in anyone and in everyone who calls out to him. So anyone can be God's spokespersons when you deny the flesh and its desires and learn to listen to and obey the Spirit of God. Because God lives inside of us. The shed blood of Jesus made it so that a holy God can live in this unholy body of mine. I don't have to be the Pope. I don't have to go through all this hoopla in order to be the spokesperson for God in this day and age. That's the advantage that we have over the Old Testament. That's the advantage that angels are jealous of. And it's in you, it's in me. It's in anyone who believes in Jesus. You don't have to be the Pope, like I said. You don't have to be singled out by an old prophet to be anointed in this way. That's the mercy of God to those who believe. Therefore, after the resurrection of Jesus, this time now that we're in, it means that these Vatican institutions are not necessary. In terms of Christian or Messianic theology, the Vatican is rendered completely useless. The position of a pope is futile. There's nothing to gain from it but money and erroneous veneration. The Catholic rituals of sanctification are not necessary because if we go back to such systems like those, then it's like believing in the sacrifice of the sovereign God Jesus, but then going back to regular animal sacrifices. Follow me on this. We know it's an insult to consider the blood of God as common as the blood of bulls. It's an insult to consider the blood of God to be as weak as mortal blood. But that's exactly what we do when we believe in Jesus, yet we go back to sanctification rituals, to sanctification ceremonies, such as the Vatican promotes. We're essentially saying, sorry God, but you being sacrificed was not enough to save me. I still feel I have to prove it with this lifetime of rituals. Listen, in Jesus, you are complete and saved forever. His grace is enough. These Vatican temples and Vatican practices are rendered futile under the blood covenant of Jesus, useless in their intent. And I'm really sorry if I offended anyone, but I'm Dani was invented. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you're already subscribed to this channel, then please consider sharing some videos. Peace.